Hello everyone, and welcome to this weekly webinar produced by Business Performance USA. We're honored to have you here as our guest, or perhaps you're watching online on demand, which is great just as well. We're going to let you know that Business Performance USA is a nonprofit organization dedicated to growing your business and your career. We freely share our We freely share with you on our webinars the same intellectual property that we use with our clients. And we do this because we really believe that businesses are the backbones of our communities and creating prosperity for all. So we want to see businesses grow. We want to see your careers flourish, frankly. So we're happy to have you here today. Our webinar is Critical Numbers Series, Part 2, Line of Significance. We'll be discussing surefire ways to keep your company alive and well and on track. I'm Victor Dominguez. I'm managing partner of the Linkages Group, and I will be your host for this hour. And let me switch on over. Today, our executive presenter is Ms. Cynthia Stewart, managing partner for Evermore Services, your partner in building tomorrow businesses today. Cynthia holds her MBA and is certified by the American Society for Quality as a manager of quality and organizational excellence, as well as a Six Sigma Black Belt. Cynthia is very accomplished, very capable as well, most certainly. She partners with leaders in growing high-performance organizations through a strategic and staged approach to employee development, quality improvement, and business problem solving. Cynthia successfully led and directed culture change teams at all levels across 11 states during her tenure as Senior Internal Business Improvement Advisor with Central and Southwest and American Electric Power, including merger assignments that created the third largest value-generating utility in the United States. Cynthia is also credited with having guided thousands of people in hundreds of teams in accruing $150 million in direct savings and close to $2 billion in indirect savings. Now, we want to be sure that we make this hour worth your time, so feel free to ask questions using the chat feature or the questions feature as well. And you can always email me. My email address is victor@businessperformanceusa.org. The reason you may want to do that is to ask me questions about this webinar or other topics that we have produced. We want to engage with you and, like we said, share our information and practices with you so you can help grow your organization. So engage us, talk to us, and let us know how we may serve you. Importantly, you can visit our website, download Cynthia's white papers on vital signs, and quite importantly, you can watch all of our webinars on demand at your convenience. You can do that by simply becoming a member of Business Performance USA. Just go to our homepage on .org, look for the B in the upper right-hand corner, and click on that and become a member. It's easy to sign up, and like I said, it's all free. So, having said all that, let's just jump on in, and Cynthia, let's let you have a whirl at it.
Well, thanks, Victor. I appreciate that. You know, I'm excited to be here today and present this information. I actually subscribe to many blogs, and I'm in LinkedIn groups, and I'm really surprised this isn't a more relevant or prevalent topic. So what I'm going to talk about today comes from my own experience across several decades working with organizations and teams and individuals, and it comes out of this series on the topic of critical numbers. I haven't really described and didn't in my Vital Signs webinar what critical numbers are, but I worked in this work called Open Book Leadership. It was a business movement in the 90s to engage employees as business partners in the business. And critical numbers are those numbers that represent the critical performance at any level of the organization. So, you know, for instance, if you're a publicly traded company, it might be earnings per share, or it could be return on investment of 15%, or it could be your sales goal of $100 million, or it could be 95% of your calls from your call center should be answered in 1 minute. It really doesn't matter. Your employees, you and your employees should be very clear what your critical numbers are. And in order to give you a really nice introduction, go to my Vital Signs webinar and listen to that, and also download my white paper. What I'm going to do in this webinar is talk about this idea of the line of significance. That's a term I've picked up that people don't talk about, and I think it's really an important part of what we do to engage our employees in the daily work of the business. And basically, I'm going to show you how to align work activities and processes to your top-level goals and explain the steps to defining team-level scorecards. So what I'll do first as I show this next slide is really we're just going to quickly run through some really important ideas from Vital Signs from my June 25th. So when we look at the next slide, we're going to see that Vital Signs are your top-level critical numbers for the company's health and fitness. And what I mean by that is it's any number that if it moves in the wrong direction could indicate the very survival of the company is at stake. Now, I talked about how vital signs are essential in running the business and that they really drive your organizational focus to concentrate the energy across the organization, the energy of your employees and your groups and your teams to those strategic focus areas that are most important to the business. They basically guide your best long-term interest. And on my next slide, I really show you that vital signs help us tie to strategic plans. And what I find is that people get vision and mission mixed up. People think that purpose is the same exactly as mission, and they don't even talk about values. Some do, but not most, and they don't understand how strategies factor into your business plan. So this little slide just gives us a quick top-level, easy to remember overview of what purpose is. It's why we exist. And basically the vision statement, which is what we want to be in the long term, which is a stretch, by the way. It's always a stretch. Your vision is always a stretch. Encompasses your vision. And the mission tells you how you're going to serve that mission, that purpose, and who you're going to serve in that purpose. And it talks about your values, how you want to be seen, how you'll behave. Your strategies tell you how you'll become what you want to be, and your objectives tell you what you're going to achieve in how you become what you want to be. So these are the ways that your strategic plan and your vital signs line up to help execute your vision, mission, and objectives and strategies. And the next slide talks about how we compare vital signs from the standpoint of your body to the organization itself. So your body, your vital signs are weight, temperature, blood pressure, and pulse. And your organization is basically employee growth, customer engagement, process quality, and financial fitness based on an adaptation from the balanced scorecard. And I add one more to all of this, and that's the mind and soul, which is the life's purpose, ties to the constancy of purpose, which is the mind and soul of the organization. In the next slide, I really talk about the business plan linkages, and I went over these pretty well in the vital signs, but just know that your stakeholders are seen through the lens of, they're tied together through the lens of your purpose, which is actualized through your vision and mission and values, through the strategic focus areas, focused on specific goals for the usually annual or short-term goals or long-term goals, and your business plan lays those out in terms of objectives and actions. Now, when I talk to you today, and on the next slide I talk about those benefits, of the benefits to this approach of thinking about critical numbers, you will more than double your probability of achieving your company purpose goals and objectives if you'll lay these out as your strategic plan into your business plan, and more importantly into the actions of the organization itself, in focusing the energies and aligning the energies where they need to be aligned behind your strategic focus areas, and you do that through these vital signs. And this all comes together to make this a living document that every employee engages in. Okay, so that's a quick summary, and with that we're going to go ahead and shift to the critical numbers series, what I'm planning to talk about in this webinar, which is the line of significance. So next slide, on the next slide I just go ahead and I define what I mean by line of significance. Basically, it's your line of sight, and it's the ability for each employee to understand how their contribution connects to the overall goals of the business. And by using the techniques we talk about in linking activity measures to strategic goals and working with employees to understand the linkages, they will make more significant contributions to the business success. So that's where the significance comes in. So the line of significance shows how employees connect and also shows how their work, their decisions, and their actions are significant in achieving company success. And alignment, as I show on the next slide, is basically, I'm using this idea of geese, a flock of geese. It's important that activities at every level should align with the strategic plan, and that alignment strengthens the performance since everyone is pulling together. And I know that many of you have seen the geese, and Victor, let's ask people to write the answer in their box in terms of why do geese fly in this way?
Okay, good idea, Cynthia. So in the chat box, you could technically use a question as well. But in the chat box, you will have a field there where you can type in your message and let us know what you think the advantages are or reason for migrating birds to fly in this formation. So we're getting some input already, and we thank our audience for that. Here's one input: reduce the drag by flying in the sweet spot of the leader. But that's got to be true. We certainly see that in birds. We see it in racers, bicyclists, cars, and whatnot. Reduce your drag and get into the sweet spot. Here's a comment: is navigation is one, and efficiency is another comment. Direction is another comment, and here's another comment: easier to change off when the leader gets tired. So switching out, let someone do the heavy work when they tire. That certainly makes sense. Rotate, if you will. We've talked about that in other webinars. So those are some of the comments, Cynthia. And what is your input in regards to this?
Well, first of all, those are all great comments so people understand this formation. So the thing that I heard was efficient, and yes, it's very efficient to help deal with wind currents and to help minimize the drag. So the leader takes the brunt of it in this formation, with those flying behind the leader have to expend less energy. It makes it, the key here is that they are able to fly very long distances, both because of this formation, but also because they do rotate their leaders. So it's good for the long distance. It also requires that both a leader and the team are all well aligned in order to make those long distances. And this is true for a company. The leader sets the direction, and when the teams are flying in alignment, the business is stronger to achieve its purpose. So Victor, on the next one, I really would like to do a quick poll. Critical numbers only matter to management or owners. Is that true or false? And maybe you could oh, there you go. Thanks.
Okay, folks. So if you look at your user interface, you'll see the poll drop-down section. Here's how you can vote for that poll. And clearly, true or false. critical numbers only matter to management or owner. We see the numbers starting to come in, and we thank you for that. But it's averaging out somewhat even, and false is starting to take the lead. So I feel like I'm calling a horse race here, but I'll just give it a few more seconds to close out this poll, and we will look at the results. So here we go. Okay, we're going to close out, and in 3 and 2 and 1, let me switch over to that. Closing polls. Okay, Cynthia, here are our results. True is coming in at 42%, and false is coming in at 58%. False is winning, in a sense, in terms of the majority opinion. What do you have to say about that, Cynthia?
Well, on this next slide, what I'm going to show you is why it matters. I would agree that it matters to many more than just the management. In fact, it matters to everyone in the organization. And here's what I'm going to tell you about that. For an individual contributor, it helps you, if you're an individual contributor, it helps you focus your actions on making your contributions significant. So we really want our contributions to be significant. Well, that helps us get better performance reviews. It helps us increase our salary. It gives us better bonuses if we're on a bonus plan. It helps us feel better about ourselves in our very work. So by understanding what it is that we're supposed to focus on, it helps us to make a more significant contribution. If you're the manager of a team, it helps you fully engage the team in significant contributions. It helps you focus. That's the key, because we're all drawn by many different priorities, and we can be very frustrated when we can't really move the ball down the court, and that's where our focus needs to be. If you're a director of a process or a function, it helps you to align the whole value chain, your function or your process to the whole value chain. Again, a question of significance. If you're the executive in charge of the business or the mission, as in the case of a nonprofit, or if you're the business owner, it's really important to get everyone flying in the same direction. And like we said, it helps you get longer distances. It makes you more efficient when everybody's aligned. Or if you're a solopreneur, you may think, well, this doesn't matter to me. Well, yeah, it does. A solopreneur just means that instead of working in the traditional setup where you have employees working for you or you report to a boss, it means that you have to reach beyond your organization out to other solopreneurs, out to other organizations to really help fulfill your mission. So it has to do with your business partners and support resources. So it doesn't really matter what role you're in. All of this does matter. Having a line of significance matters to you. So to set that line of significance, we're going to move on and talk about it and talk about specifically what to measure. And actually on the next slide we talk about 3 levels of measures. We have the organizational level and vital signs. I've talked about that, very top level. Those significant few measures that help you know whether your organization is alive or dead in the water is the way I say it. Also there's process. That's the next level. These are really ones that we focus on core process, and that helps you measure how efficient the process is, how effective it is in delivering quality products and services, and how effective it is in your economics, how well it preserves the actual dollars and resources that run those processes. And then below that, the activity or the individual level is time, cost, and quality. So to establish the line of sight and alignment, it helps to know these 3 levels of organizational performance. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. I'm going to show the linkages here. So let's say that our purpose, and we talked about purpose and vital signs and the importance of it. Our purpose is ideal patient care, and that's a trademark term by Dr. John Carnegie, a man that I work with on adaptive design. And this is identified specifically for hospitals, clinics, doctors' clinics, and nurses, so forth. But you could switch that out to say ideal customer care. We tie that to the strategy of customer engagement, a particular focus, a strategic focus area, customer engagement. And below that, we tie it to the vital sign of patient satisfaction. And as we drill into the process, one of the things that's really important to patients is that they have an accurate bill and it comes on time. They hate, think of the hours wasted in trying to, you've all had this, trying to track down all of those costs that you get billed every time you go to the doctor or the hospital. So an accurate customer bill really affects the customer engagement quotient in terms of how satisfied you are with your whole experience. And if we drill deep into the activity, obviously when a caregiver, after they give their particular care to that patient, they have to say exactly what they did accurately, and then it has to be coded accurately. So this is how you may think of, as you drill into the organization, how you can go from a purpose of ideal patient care all the way out into your billing organization that presents those bills to the customer or to the patient, and that affects your patient satisfaction and ultimately your customer engagement. Are they going to use you again? So let's move to the next slide.
Cynthia, I have a quick question here from the audience, and we thank you for that. It's a good opportunity just to note that you can submit questions through the question feature or the chat feature, either way. Cynthia, the question is very straightforward. Is this critical number, I'm embellishing here a little bit to put it in perspective, is this critical number linkages related specifically to healthcare? Is this industry agnostic? The viewer is asking because they're wondering if this is just a healthcare specific index.
Oh, that's a great question. I am simply using healthcare because it's on our minds and it's the field that I work in quite a bit. I'm just using that as an example. And I've tried to use something that everyone has customers. Everyone has hopefully some way to assess the satisfaction of their customers, and everyone has to bill. So this is certainly a universal example.
Thank you, Cynthia.
So let's move on now, and I want to drill in. I talked about organizational measures and vital signs. So I'm going to talk a little, and that was in my vital signs webinar and in my white paper. I'm going to talk now a little bit more about process measures. We can't get around processes. We have processes. There is a sequence to how activities line up in order to prepare and deliver our products and services. So we have suppliers, we have inputs, process, outputs, and customers. And this is just a way to visually view what that looks like. So our suppliers, and that says supplies, but are our supplies from our suppliers, are they on time? Or are they on back order? Or did we have to return things because they weren't significant? So each of these, the suppliers, the inputs, the process, the outputs, and the customer, represent ways that we can measure our process. And we don't have to measure all of these things all of the time. We measure where we may have issues. So a lot of times we measure customer complaints, we measure customer satisfaction, and we measure accuracy, we measure efficiency, we measure error rates, things like that. Those are sort of your output or things that the customer sees. Your output measures are, did we deliver on time? Did we have good unit cost that were in line with the price for the particular product or service? Did we have defects that wasted our people's time in tracking those things down? So our outputs are what we measure just before we hand it off to the customer And if we do that, we make sure that we lessen any customer complaints. Now, when we talk about the process itself, it's really activities. And when you drill into these things, it's a whole lot easier to figure out what to measure. But what I'm showing you here is there's many ways to measure your process. A lot of times a good thing to think about is let's get upstream and measure our inputs so that we know that if we have good inputs, quality inputs, we get the material on time, it's error-free, then we know that we're going to have quality outputs. So inputs are the most commonly measured process measurement. And when you measure your processes, the leading measures indicate problems earlier in the process so they can be adjusted earlier. So I'm putting this up there to say you don't have to measure everything in your process. You want to let your measures really reflect two things: leading, that our processes are moving in a timely manner, that we have services and products moving in a timely manner through the process. We want to make sure that we have accurate and timely and error-free inputs into our process. And then from there, we want to measure those things that maybe we're seeing as problems. So
Cynthia?
we can eradicate the problems. Yeah, go ahead, Victor.
We're just getting a drop in volume and audio volume. So if you could just check your microphone.
Okay, thanks, Victor. Okay, so your process measures are really important in terms of setting up your leading indicators, which I talked about in the last webinar, and how important those are to really stay on top of things. Outputs are somewhat lagging. You certainly have to measure your outputs in many cases because of the economics of your process, because of the resources used, because of the inventories on hand. But those are lagging measures. So you want to make sure that you're thinking in terms of your leading measures upstream in the process, and then where you have to, you'll measure your lagging downstream in the process. So let's move on to the next slide. When we talk about process measures, when we talk time, there's actually 4 categories of process measures. There's your process efficiency, which is measured by time, things like speed, flexibility, responsiveness, productivity. There's also then your process economics, which are your cost measures, and we measure in terms of your resources and your costs, your expenses, your revenues, your sales, your unit costs. We also, in terms of quality, we are talking about customers' perception of effectiveness, and there we're talking about reliability, empathy, credibility, competence, flexibility, adaptability. And then in quantity, we're talking about your counts or volumetrics of delivered products and services, things like units, hours, numbers. So these are the types of process measures that we use. For instance, in using that billing example, we talked about measures of accuracy and timeliness as critical numbers, but we don't typically have a scorecard measure for the number of bills we print, other than to say, what did it cost us and do we want to get that cost down? Time is a really good measure to use because time is money. If you can squeeze time, then you can reduce costs. And time is an independent measure. It's an independent variable. So we do want to keep our eye on the ball. Not all 4 types of measures would be a critical number per se, but you would, as you measure your process, looking for leading indicators, you want to make sure that you can really tell how things are running on a daily basis, actually. So as we move on, let's talk about how we actually go through a development process for measurement. And this is a 5-step process. Basically, I've lined this up to try to make it simple to think about, well, how do you set up your critical numbers? Well, the first thing you're going to do is assess. Then we're going to assess and I'll go through these step by step. So it's assess, define, integrate, report, and improve. So let's go to the first one. Step 1 is assess. And what I mean by this, and I've set these up in inputs, process, and outputs. The inputs into your assess step is basically your strategic plan, your business plan, and your team charter. And what you do with this is you review those inputs and define what your goals are. This would happen typically in an annual time frame, but there are also those, say, long-term or 3 to 5 year measures. You're going to assess how your team affects 3 to 5 years, but normally you'll be doing this on an annual basis, and then you identify in the process what are some of the improvements that your particular team needs to make. Your output from this step is basically your team goals and your areas for improvement. And when I say team, I mean that to be basically at the activity level or even the process team. Sometimes this is cross-functional process team as well. So on the second step, what we're going to do there is basically set up and define our measures for the team. So again, we have our team goals and areas for improvement. And what we do is we identify the critical numbers by criteria, and I'm going to give you that criteria on the next slide. We're going to show an alignment to vital signs. We're going to set our baseline and our target, and we're going to set up our critical numbers. So on the next slide, let's talk about ways to decide if this is critical number, if this is truly a critical number. If this number moves in the wrong direction, the business or team fail. Does it tell you that? The critical number will balance your short-term and your long-term goals. Also, it will tell you if we really want those numbers that the team can control, if they have some control or influence, or they can impact the outcome, then that's a good measure. Also, it can be measured frequently enough to make a difference so that it's more of a lead measure than a lag measure. If you only see it every quarter, maybe you need something else. Maybe you need something that's more at least weekly, but preferably it would be some kind of daily indicator. Again, that depends on your business cycle, depends on the team and their overall function. But generally, we want something that's short-term, very, very short-term. We want it to support your district or department and company goals. We want to make sure that it allows any opportunity for improvement. And in other words, we don't want the stretch to be so far that there's no way to attain it, but we also want to make sure that there is a stretch, that there is some sense of having to adapt and improve and innovate. And we want to make sure that it doesn't harm another team, so that other groups can support it, in fact, maybe even make it their measure. These are some things that if you can say yes, if you say 7 yeses, then you've got a great number here. The key to identifying critical numbers is ensuring that they meet these criteria and that they are the right area to focus an employee's efforts, attentions, and learnings. So next, what we want to do is we want to set the target. To do that, you're going to need a baseline of your current performance, and if you don't have that, just take a short audit to get your current performance. And then also, let's look at what customer expectations might be, what performance standards you have, and what your goals are. Remember, this is really an art. It's not a science. We need to make sure that it's achievable, and yet it'll drive improvements, and that it'll help you meet expectations. So now we can move on to step 3, because after this exercise, our step 3, we now have our critical numbers defined. And so what we want to do is just take a step back and make sure that it integrates well with other teams' performance, or that it integrates well across departments. And we want to make sure that we communicate to other teams. I can't tell you how many times we've had people set their goals. Like, for instance, supply chain sets their goal, and they want to have, you know, just they want high velocity. In other words, they want a quick inventory turn, so they don't want to keep things on the shelf. But, you know, they forgot to factor in the lead time for ordering a particular part or a particular resource that you need. And so in order to set up the right velocity for that inventory turn, they've got to factor in what you need and how quickly you need it. So if you are installing poles, you've got to have those poles on hand. Or if you're a nurse and you are in the emergency room, we've got to have the bradycardia available and at hand. So it's really important that teams work together as they set their critical numbers, and that things like supply chain inventory turns don't get set in a way that really hurts other people trying to deliver good patient care or good customer care. So you really want an integrated performance system. On the next slide, I kind of show you what I mean by that.
Cynthia, we have a question here from the audience, and we always appreciate that. If I may ask it on their behalf, where do standards play into the criteria?
Well, the standards, for instance, standards come in a lot of forms and fashion. The more hierarchical your organization is, the more they like to impress supply standards or work standards, the more standards play in. Also, standards play in terms of your safety programs, and standards play in terms of your engineering. Standards play in terms of your healthcare approach. Even your protocols are based on standards that through Medicare that they set. So when you are setting your goals, you want to make sure that you assess those standards against your goals. So for instance, we want to make sure that, let's say that time is one of your goals, that you want to move a patient through this is a great example. You want to move patients every 7 minutes through the doctor's office, which is one of the standards being set. Well, you've got to have a great orchestration in order to move a patient through that quickly, which means you need all the supplies at hand. It means that you've got to have a well-orchestrated team, your nurse, and so forth. So standards play in terms of how you execute against your critical numbers.
That's excellent. Thank you, Cynthia. Appreciate that. And thank you to our audience for submitting the question.
So on the next slide, we kind of show you, now this is an old slide that I was using to help people understand how you integrate measures. And so we have strategic focus areas. This company went with 7: safety, reliability, employees and culture, building strong relationships, financial health, reasonable rates, and customer satisfaction. Well, there were line functions for distribution, transmission, customer service, and marketing, and external affairs. And we had to make sure that all of those rates factored in all of those line functions, as well as the regulatory support helped us set reasonable rates with our regulators. And this is, you can almost use this in a hospital where you change the name of the line functions. But their cross-business integration is really key if you have a large organization in setting those measures and making sure that they work like a well-orchestrated, a well-oiled machine. So this is just a quick example for integration, and it gives you an example of what I'm talking about. So let's move on to step 4 now. Step 4 has to do with your reporting structures, and your inputs are, again, your critical numbers, and you know now that it's integrated, that there's cross-business integration. Now you got to set up your scorecard and monitor the progress. And so the outputs from this step is how you're going to report it and how you're going to monitor progress. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk about some questions. Scorecards are your most common way of measuring, and I'm going to skip this because of time. Victor, let me just move on. I'm going to talk about why scorecards are important. And by the way, guys, there's many ways to do this. You can use games. Games are the most effective way to get the performance that you want. And I don't have time to get into games and game theory and things like that, but I've used games quite a bit in this venue because it really helps us just engage in a fun way where you set the rules, everybody knows the rules, and you set the rules around performance. But scorecards help you articulate your shared vision, and they give you critical feedback at the time you need it, and it helps you facilitate your business review and learning. Helps you when you're translating the vision and the strategy. So just keep in mind that scorecards, and that's a visual. Maybe it's a thermometer with, you know, the mercury rising as you are achieving it, or maybe it's a dartboard, and the more darts you see in the center, the closer you are. There's a lot of ways that you can really show and report your progress. On the next slide, actually, I even talk about them. We're familiar mostly with financial reports, the P&L and the cash flow. Hopefully you're familiar with those. If not, you need to get familiar with those. Hopefully your company is sharing those with you. On scoreboards, we're all familiar with scoreboards because we use them at games, at football games, and we use them in basketball. So scoreboards are a great way to show where you are in the game. Dashboards, we're used to those. We're used to those in flight. We're used to those on our cars. You can create your own dashboards to show, you know, with red colors, yellow, green, and red, where green is good to go and red is, uh-oh, got a problem. So game boards, charts, graphics, there's many ways that you can show your progress. So let's look at how we set up a scorecard on the next slide. Your team needs to identify how they want to track critical numbers. Get creative with this, guys, to make it fun. And then they want to show how they need to talk about how they need to display them, who's responsible for tracking, who's responsible for reporting, and how often to report. Everybody thinks you have to have an online system, but you can create pretty innovative ways, even with Excel on a Dropbox. You can create innovative ways to track your progress on plans. Now, the last step in setting your critical numbers is to look at and report. You've reported. Now you want to look at improvement. Basically what we want is we need our reports from the scorecards, which is our performance data. We're going to identify improvements, and then we're going to forecast our future results. And I talk about this in terms of, on a weekly basis, people accounting for what they have done that they said they were going to do and what they're going to do the next week and how they're going to make any improvement actions. So let's move on and talk about a simple model for improvements. As you talk about, if you look at your performance data, it's an easy thing to do to say, what am I going to do more of? What am I going to add? What am I going to do in terms of adding activity? What am I going to do less of? Things that really sort of boggled my time, took my time away and didn't get the results I wanted. What kinds of activities am I going to continue? So here's a simple model. You may think of another one. There may be other things you want to add to this simple chart, but this is a simple way to think about improvements. So in summary, what you learned is how company, process, and activity measures align. We talked about what to measure. We talked about how to develop, report, and improve performance. So I hope you'll come back to this webinar and walk through these steps with your team and figure out some games that you guys could play to improve your performance, and define what's important to your team, and discuss and talk about how you can achieve your performance. So with that, Victor, I hand it back to you unless we have any other questions.
No, Cynthia, there are no other questions at this time, and I really appreciate your input here. I just have to strongly encourage folks to even review this webinar again, take notes, and begin a dialogue with a multidisciplinary team within your company. I always like to look at teams that represent a supply chain, or what I call a value chain, that delivers a quality customer experience, whether it's patients or customers or whomever, and incorporate the input from your stakeholders as well. This kind of dialogue is really going to start interaction, and if you're interested in employee engagement, if you're interested in improving your company's performance, this deck alone will take you real far in getting that kind of collaborative experience, which drives your company steadily towards continuous improvement in a way that's tangible and practical and actionable. So thank you, Cynthia. Once again, you're tremendous in what you do. We just want to give a quick note to how this content is constructed. Cynthia has really created a series here, beginning with vital signs, which she addressed. This webinar, line of significance, surefire ways to keep your company alive and well. And coming in next, results are in. So now what? What do we do now? And that's this comprehensive series is designed to put your company on track and moving forward and driving continual improvement. So we encourage you to participate. We have other webinars coming up, a branding webinar, which I will be hosting, and Kiss Kick Part 3, Exemplary Knowledge Series from Dr. Jeff Stewart. We encourage you to look into all of those. We also encourage you to take a look at our website, businessperformanceusa.org. This is a member page. It happens to be my wall. And you can sign up for free right on this button here, the worker bee. And by doing so, you'll have access to all of our blogs, all of our videos, and these are all of our webinars on demand, ready for you to watch at your convenience and study and take notes and, again, move your organization forward. So we encourage you to become a member, engage us by asking us questions, challenge us with your challenges and how we can brainstorm to move your organization forward. I'm Victor Dominguez, Interim Executive Director of Business Performance USA. We thank again our colleague Cynthia Stewart for her brilliant insight, and we'll be closing out. Let me just check one last thing. Yeah, we will close out, and thank you again for your time. Take care now.